Doug said he wouldn't be able to be here, so he asked me to record it. I have this YouTube channel. I put some talks I do, I put on a YouTube channel, and then I have a blog, Free Spirit of Inquiry, that I've been doing for many years, but I never publicized it, so hardly anybody knows about it, so now more people know about it. It's interesting, this YouTube channel, I had like 20 subscribers, and then there's a donkey who lives next door to me in a field, and I took a video of him, like an intimate meeting with me and the donkey, and I guess there's some donkey websites out, so I sent it to 12 people, and now the last one I did got 8,000 views. So
Donkey talk.
Barney is the YouTube star. Okay, so so Judith talked about the Paramitas. I'm going to talk about the Paramitas also, from a slightly different translation and different emphasis on certain things. An old teacher of mine, Reb Anderson, wrote this book, Entering the Mind of Buddha, which is all about the Paramitas, and I'm studying it in another group. 2 other Zoom groups have studied this book, so I'm pretty familiar with it. And so I thought I'd go over each of the 6 Paramitas. He does a little different, actually he even titles that Paramitas different than Thai. So it's a little different, but I'll just go ahead and start. And so I'll refer to my notes quite a bit here, probably at the beginning anyway.
Roger, could you speak up a little?
Yes, I can, yeah. I've got hearing aids in, so my voice is really loud to me. So let me project it out here. Starting with the 4 Noble Truths, or the 4 Noble Truths. Reb taught, he had a different interpretation of the first one, which is life is suffering, and he said, life is suffering under certain conditions, and those conditions are self-clinging. When we cling to the idea of being a separate body-mind, that causes suffering. So that doesn't mean that life itself is always suffering, And Thai had a saying that, we're made of everything in the whole universe. Like our interbeing is our being one substance with all beings throughout the whole universe, or the multiverse, or whatever you want to call it, the boundlessness and the never-ending aspect of our life. So I've shared with a few people here, I think already, that what's been an ongoing question for me, and it changes, year to year, and life stage to life stage, but it's like, where is the actual thing that's me, that's unique? Where's the actual substance, or the actual entity that's Roger? There's lots of Rogers. There's lots of Roger Hawkins even. But where's that entity? And I've never been able to find anything except just a thought about it that sets off a lot of feelings, but it doesn't really create any new substance or new life force. It's just different. It's different. It's the life force that we all are, taking the form of thoughts, feelings, perceptions. So, rebels say that on the planet now there's close to 8 billion dances going on. The dance of life, or the flow of the river of life, is going on, but there's only one dancer, and there's only one river. And like the teaching of impermanence is that you can never step into the same river twice. So it's always changing, always flowing. And what's really gotten me lately is one of my old teachers said many years ago, he said this, but it got reignited in my practice here, that basically we're born and die 10,000 times or 70,000 times every minute, or some uncountable number. right? We can't comprehend or even imagine how fast our ideas in our experiences are just in that river transforming and reflecting the life force that we all are. So, in order to see this clearly, the first paramita, what Reb calls the first paramita, generosity. And he says that generosity is the fundamental foundation upon which all the bodhisattva practices rest. It's often considered the first step in training ourselves to begin to let go of our various patterns of self-clinging. And so he says, when we start with these practices, we may struggle and feel frustrated if we begin without first establishing a foundation of generosity. So as an example, he says, when we encounter difficulties with concentration, if we look carefully, we may notice that we're not being generous with our difficulty with concentration. In other words, we get frustrated because we expect ourselves to be able to concentrate up to a certain level. Like in Soto Zen, one beginning practice we give to people is to on your in-breath count 1, or you can count to 10 on your in-breaths or your out-breaths, but in each cycle you count to 10, and then when you get to 10 you start over again. And the idea is to not be judgmental at all. But most of the time, because we're just starting out, we get pretty judgmental when we can't get to 10 before we lose count, go somewhere else, So learning that fundamental practice of unconditional acceptance of all of our experience, and then offering it to the Buddha. Reb's practice is that practice of generosity is being generous with ourselves and being generous with the Buddha by offering it back to the Buddha. The Buddha is, an indescribable and not perceivable essence that is everything, beyond what we can comprehend. And I have some difficulty with the term perfection. These are called the 6 perfections. That's the main translation, is the 6 perfections. But, the other thing you learn after practicing for a while is the way is boundless. And so there's no end to how deep we can go with this practice. It's like boundless space. We've all had that experience, I think, as kids. I know I did quite a few times. Of how can it be that space can just go on literally without end? How can that be possible? But then if you think about it, how could it not be that way? Right? It's an impossibility, but it can't be otherwise, because that's the way it is. That's the way it's always been, kind of thing. So just entertaining those big questions, it's limitless. So of course, there's no perfection in terms of perfecting coming to the end of the questioning, maybe the questions don't arise, but then some teachers that have the reputation of being totally enlightened, they'll say, well, the questions of manifestation or boundlessness, those don't arise anymore. But the question of perfection, of course, would not arise either. So you don't need the concept of perfection. My God, are you kidding me? I'm just looking down. Judith said I'm going to talk for 20 or 30 minutes, and I haven't even started. I've been talking 9 minutes. What am I going to do?
Fine.
All right.
That's self-awareness.
Yeah, right. Okay, so let's
Be generous.
Let's be generous.
Be generous.
Let's be generous to the other Paramitas and say something about them, huh? Anyway, but we practice kind of learning to welcome everything unconditionally, right? So let's move to the second one. The second one, I was surprised to hear that Thay's definition of the second paramita is inclusiveness, because Reb's and many other interpretations or versions are ethics. So I like inclusiveness a lot better. It's better to be inclusive. Of course, you can see how it follows from generosity, that if we're learning how to be generous and giving, we give everything away. If we're actually willing to give everything away, including our bliss, we can also learn to give away our suffering. You know, so that's not a bad deal. But then there's no more fear. So one last thing to say about generosity is it's the gift of fearlessness is the greatest gift. Many teachers will say that we can give because there's nothing outside anymore. So, and inclusiveness, you know, again, is, you know, what Thai talks about as our interbeing. So the recognition of our shared being is, you know, of course, the recognition of our interbeing. And the practice of offering all of our experience, taking refuge in the Buddha, of course, that is the recognition of our interbeing. Because we're not taking refuge in some other Buddha, we're taking refuge in the very experience of being alive. And so, you know, the true test of reality is our actual experience, not what we say about it. But when we talk about great faith in Buddhism, faith is not just a belief, it's a state of being. So that state of being cannot be captured in any beliefs. It can't be, again, it's not perceivable or describable. But faith, you know, what it comes down for me more and more is faith in the transparency, which is an actual experience of being transparent. What we normally are so deeply conditioned to consider to be the outside world becomes more transparent to just our presence of being aware. In other words, the solidity, you know, the concrete solidity of the outside world begins to dissolve and not be clung to. Again, we don't need to grasp at it because we see that there is nothing outside to grasp. Yeah, come on in.
Other door?
Other door.
Yeah, I'll wait till she gets in. We moved the talk up on the schedule. We did. It was scheduled for 5:30, but I don't know. We did the walking meditation. We came back and God, now I've only got another hour and a half before the talk, so we decided to move it up. So sorry, it's not like you were late, but
Okay.
yeah. So I was talking about how the outside world begins to feel less solid and more like a flowing of the river of our life force, and the life force that lights us up. There's a great Hindu master, Yogananda, who had a saying that I like a lot. You know, there are no perfect metaphors, but I like his metaphor where he says, you know, he's a bhakti devotee, so he uses God. He says, God is the electricity, human beings are the light bulbs. So the life force that we are, we're all lit up, you know. Of course, we need the light of the sun, but we're lit up by the electricity of our life force, you know, and it's unconditionally accepting of whatever we experience. So, you know, inclusiveness means being inclusive of all beings and inclusive of all of our experience. So we learn, when Reb says it's ethics, we learn to be careful in how we approach life and how we treat others. You know, and Thai had a saying that the world of suffering and discrimination is filled with the light of the rising sun. So that's, wow, you know. It's kind of like Rumi's poem where he says, that Judith told me, Rumi's poem, that even after all this time, the sun has never said to the earth, "You owe me." And then he says, look what happens with love like that. It lights up the sky. So it lights us up and it fills us up, you know. So it's like our true nature totally pervades all of our experience in that way. When we really deeply can embody that, then maybe the questions about suffering and perfection and all that just become irrelevant. So all of our conceptual structures, you know, that are flowing down the river of our life force just dissolve, you know, they're not really relevant anymore. And so the third paramita, Reb describes as patience. So patience is learning for me, it's always been about being willing and able to delay our gratification, to be with our experience without having to act impulsively, you know, and not grasping or turning away from it. So the song of this, in Buddhism, there's a little sutra, I guess, actually. The Song of the Jewel Mirror Samadhi says, grasping and turning away, part of it is, grasping and turning away are both wrong, for it's like a massive fire. So Reb says that Buddhists sit at the center of suffering of all beings and have developed the capacity to open to boundless suffering. This capacity is perfection of patience, and the capacity of Buddhas to listen to the cries of the world. So the Bodhisattva vow, you know, the beautiful statue that Karen brought, Kuan Yin, Avalokiteshvara, in all the Buddhist versions of Kuan Yin that I've heard, it's the definition is hearer of the cries of the world. So Bodhisattvas who aspire to this, you know, the Bodhisattva vow is the vow to save all beings before we save ourselves. You know, so when we realize there is no separate self, that vow is just there. The vow to save the self is the vow to save all beings, because we are the self of all beings. And they're, you know, so bodhisattvas are people just like us. They're not these celestial, I mean, I guess in some of the, you know, mythologies and the pantheons or whatever, they're considered beings that are born of this vow. They're born through this vow, not through karma. Not because they have to work through all this karma, but because of that vow, they want to come back and not just go off and be in bliss all the time. They come back and fully willing to enter the deepest suffering, so that we develop the capacity to open to deeper and deeper layers of suffering. So Buddha nature is the pure fruit of enlightenment immersed in the muddy water of delusion. And that's why the lotus plant, you know, is a really good metaphor for our teacher, for the teaching. And like Judith said, Judith decided to rename our Sangha, the Lotus Petal Sangha, because the lotus plant, you know, it grows in the mud, it's nurtured through the mud, but it's not stained like water and mud. When it blooms up out of the water, everything just falls off and it's there in its crystal purity. So it's not stained by the world of suffering and discrimination, but it has the power to transform that. So our true nature has the power to transform the suffering. And it's all based on intimacy. You know, there's 4 bodhisattva vows. The first one is, there's different translations of it, but the one I'm most familiar is that beings are numberless, I vow to save them, is the first one. The second one is, delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to exhaust them or transform them. The third one is, the Buddha way is boundless, I vow to perceive it. And the fourth one is, what is the fourth one? Does someone know the fourth one?
I knew the third one, but
Yeah, the fourth one. I've only. Okay, so I'm getting closer to no mind too. I have to admit that, right? The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to become it, or something like that. Yeah,
To
something.
reveal it.
To reveal it. Well, that's another translation. Yeah, and so I was going to say that Reb has he, in one of his Dharma talks I watched on YouTube, he talked about how he would like to transform the I vow, the second part of each vow, like I vow to become it or perceive it. He said he would like to change each one to I vow to be intimate with that, with all the suffering beings in the Buddha way, and the unsurpassable. I vow to be intimate with it. So it's all based on intimacy. And I'm still on patience, but we'll get there.
Can you say what you mean by intimacy?
Completely one. No separation. Obviously, no separation. It implies, intimate implies two things that are very close together, but it's actually beyond that. It's it's closer than close, as you say.
Mm.
Yeah, our Buddha nature. It's like the eyes can't see itself. Our eyes looking out, we can't see our eyes because we're too close to them. We are the looking, right? Yeah. So I was gonna also tell the Hakuin story, but since you already told it, I don't have to tell it. But I can read a couple things that Reb said about it. That's interesting. He said Hakuin was patient when they blamed him, and he was patient when they praised him. The story does not say that he did not care that they blamed or praised him. It also does not say that he didn't feel anything. If it said that he didn't feel anything, it would make the story much less interesting to me. In this story, Hakuin was patient with others. He was patient with his feelings when he was blamed. He was patient with his feelings when he was praised. So it's about being patient, not being like so disconnected that you don't care what anybody says. That makes him more human. Okay, so. And the fourth one, it starts with a koan. He has a little subtitle to each chapter here.
Sir Roger, could
Yeah.
you say what a koan is?
Oh yeah. A koan is often said as like a riddle or it's like a Zen saying where it's usually between a teacher and a monk and the master. And the monk will ask a question and the master will answer from his enlightened awareness. The way I was kind of taught to do it is like when you're trying to work on a koan, put yourself in the koan, so you become the koan. And it's a way to express the ultimate dimension, what Tai calls the ultimate dimension, our Buddha nature. How do you express the spirit of our Buddha nature in terms of the relative world? So usually the teacher is asking not for a verbal explanation, but for an intuitive, experiential reply. So in this koan, the master Baoche, and I don't know who he was, but he was fanning himself, and a monk approached and said, "Master, the nature of the wind is permanent, and there is no place it does not reach. Why then do you fan yourself?" And the master replies, "Although you understand that the nature of the wind is permanent, you do not understand the meaning of it reaching everywhere." So the monk says, "What is the meaning of it reaching everywhere?" And the master just kept fanning himself. So Reb's let's see, well, Reb's explanation was, and then the monk bowed deeply like he got it. Reb says, the actualization of the Buddha Dharma, the vital path of its authentic transmission, is like this. If you say that you do not need to fan yourself because the nature of wind is permanent, and you can have wind without fanning, you understand neither permanence nor the nature of wind. So in other words, we need to make efforts, you know. But whose effort is it really that we're making? Right? So wind, in Zen stories, the wind will be a metaphor for our true nature. The nature of the wind is permanent. Well, you know, we're taught that nothing is permanent, right? So that which is imperceivable or indescribable is our Buddha nature. That's the only thing that we can't comprehend. We could say, or here and now, we're always here. It's here and now is always here, right? And it's always now. So that's the one permanent thing. Of course, maybe it's not permanent when we die. I don't know, but that's so. The nature of the wind is permanent, and so for me, there's a deeper meaning to this koan. Is that when the master kept fanning himself, it was the life force. He wasn't doing the fanning, because he says you don't understand the meaning of it reaching everywhere. Meaning, you're asking why am I keep fanning myself? Because I'm hot and I want to cool off. So I'm receiving Buddha's spirit of love and compassion that gives me the ability to keep fanning myself. But the actual lighting up of my mind that activates the fanning is our Buddha nature. In other words, there is no self-free will. There's no free will because there's no permanent self, right? So it pervades everywhere, including everything we ever experience in life is the Buddha nature. So we are the Buddha. That's when you say we all are Buddhas, because we are. That's what we are in reality. Okay, so and then concentration is the next one, would be the fifth one, and I forget what is Thai called the fifth one?
I can get out my notes.
Yeah.
It's up here on the board.
Look on the board, yeah.
Meditation?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it's meditation. Okay. Yeah. Well, in concentration is being tranquil, you know, and the first 3 or 4 paramitas lead up to the ability to concentrate, because we have to be generous with ourselves and be all-inclusive of our experience and very patient with ourselves, in order to be able to stay focused and concentrated on our essential being. In other words, to deeply contemplate phenomena, we need to be deeply developed in the first 3 paramitas, 4 paramitas. Effort is the 4th one. So when we deeply learn to fully embody the spirit of the first 4, then we're able to deeply contemplate the nature of phenomena and gain insight into what actually in suffering is the deep recognition of the intimacy that we share with all beings. And that's perfect wisdom, and that's the 6th one. And I could say more about that. But I think, but I'm right at 30 minutes, so I think the last 2 are pretty self-explanatory. If we get an idea of the first 4, last 2 are, you can say a lot more about them and sing heroic praises to the perfection of wisdom, like is in this. But I'll say one more thing, that this whole thing, the devotion to the Bodhisattva way, it's based on intimacy, and that we become very devoted to that spirit of intimacy, and become very intimate with devotion, that spirit of devotion. And since we talked about prostrations, I thought I could end the talk by talking about an experience that Reb had that really, for me, dispels a lot of the myths about Zen not being devotional. So I'll read from this page here. And so Hui Ning was one of the great patriarchs of Zen in the Golden Age. He was the founder of 4 different major schools of Zen Buddhism, including the Rinzai sect that Tai lineage descends from. So in the early years of this century, I traveled to China with a group of Zen comrades to make a pilgrimage to the monasteries of some of our ancestors. On the morning we were going to visit the monastery of Huining and pay our respects to the 6th ancestor, as I was leaving my hotel room, my wife said to me, "I wish you well as you go now to meet your ancestor." Hearing these words, my whole body resounded with joy. We approached the temple gate, and as we entered, I felt joy. Unexpected goosebumps arose all over my body, and tears started to flow from my eyes. We walked forward and climbed the stairs of the great hall of the monastery and entered. And my body spontaneously felt moved to offer prostrations. The usual number is 3, and 3 were offered, and yet the bowing continued, and then there were 9 bows, and the bowing continued, and the sweat started flowing, along with the tears, and the bowing continued until it seemed that the bows would never end. And yet, at what seemed like 108, the bowing stopped. The robes were soaked, and the heart was joyful to meet the ancestor who was born of perfect wisdom. So what's interesting about this wasn't something he was planning, you know. It was just spontaneous, having his heart broke open. That's another phrase when we somehow our body reacts and is deeply moved by an experience of intimacy with our true source. So, yeah. Anyway, so I really, Reb's been an invaluable teacher for me. And I think we gave the 2 of us have given a fairly complete teaching on the Paramitas, so we can open up for discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Roger.
You're welcome. I forgot to say that one of my best teachers in patience, Bruno. He's very patient, except when the food bowl is late.
Good boy.
There goes that tail.
He knows we're talking about him.
He's certainly calmed down since he was a pup.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
We used to bring him to Cloud Cottage. Offering all those songs was really interesting because that brought back a lot of memories. I haven't sung those songs for many years.
Well, we didn't do a great job of it, I'm afraid, but it'll happen eventually, because we'll come back and we'll do the song.
Well, we're all beginners again, you know. I mean, so yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
Philip used to call Mr. Rogers Zen, the songs. They're like
That's a good,
children's songs.
Mr. Rogers. Yeah, a real bodhisattva, Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, oh, really?
Yeah, yeah.
So true.
We are all neighbors.
Mhm. We're some of the few people that were too old to know Mr. Rogers as a kid, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Did you hear me say that I didn't like the word perfection? I thought you might have missed that.
No, I heard that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have that in common.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you feel about merit.
Well, there's Bodhidharma. Remember Bodhidharma?
Yes, how can you not remember Bodhidharma?
Bodhidharma was the patriarch who brought Buddhism from India to China in the 5th century. And there was a famous meeting, it's now a koan, I guess, between, the emperor of China and Bodhidharma. And I don't remember the whole conversation, but the emperor asked him, "What merit do I have if I become enlightened?" He said, "No merit, only vast emptiness."
And he supposedly tore off his eyelashes
Oh,
and
boy.
threw them so that he could stay concentrated, and threw them on the ground, and tea plants grew from his eyelashes, from his eyelids, I mean.
Mm, yeah, interesting.
There are a lot of good myths
Yes.
in Buddhism as well
Fairy
as
tales.
Christianity.
Yeah, because some of the paintings or scrolls of Bodhidharma would show him with these really long eyelashes that were kind of curling up. And Bernie Glassman, as a joke, grew his eyelashes out like this and they were curling up so he looked like Bodhidharma.
I have a question. It seemed as though, I don't know if I didn't, it seemed as though you started with, you ended with generosity and the Paramitas, and you started with generosity.
Yeah.
I noticed that too.
Did it just happen that you started,
Yeah,
or you ended with it,
Well,
you weren't doing it
they're in
sequentially?
order in some books, but I just put them down out of order, actually.
Oh, you did? Oh, I assumed that. Oh, okay. So,
Well,
I didn't think they had a cardinal order to them. I thought they were.
well, maybe they
6
don't, but
Paramitas.
maybe they don't.
the
But
inter-are.
yeah, the inter-are, that's the thing, is they all are interpenetrating each other, the spirit. But there is, I guess, Reb kind of categorized them in a way that they build on each other.
Yes, but it doesn't really matter.
Right, I did know that.
Yeah.
But I also was curious because I think some traditions do put altruism at the very final point.
I have a question. I might have missed this in the beginning when you opened up your talk, but who the heck is Rev?
Oh, okay.
And
Well-
why is he important?
Well, you know, the San Francisco Zen Center was founded by Suzuki Roshi
Yeah.
back in the
That's
the late
$3
'60s in the Tassajara Monastery. Suzuki Roshi started in 1960, and then Reb has been there since 1967. He was the first teacher I ever, and some of you may know if you're conversant with some of the many scandals in Zen Buddhism. Probably one of the most famous ones in America was my first real teacher, Baker Roshi, who was 35 when he became, a Zen master. And, he got caught up in kind of a jet set life. That was a term way back in the 70s and 80s for like yuppies. It used to be jet setters, And then he invited Governor Jerry Brown became governor of California in 1974, and he became somehow Baker Roshi became friends with him, and he came down to one of our training periods. We were all isolated, 50 young kids isolated away inland of Carmel Valley in the Tassajara Monastery, and he came down and gave us talks, and the whole group of all 50 of us were there, and he was talking about how, he and his opponent were bad-mouthing each other on how the campaigns went and all this. And then afterwards, when he left, Baker Roshi said, "Well, he seems like a really nice guy, but remember that saying, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely." And Baker Roshi fell to that too.
Well, that's not unlike other religious people.
No, and the reason I mentioned it because what really happened, and Reb was only 40 years old when Baker Roshi crashed. He was having an affair with one of his best friends at Green Gulch. And then it came out, he was driving this $60,000 BMW, and the rest of us were working for $1.35 an hour, at a restaurant or something. So, it was just became too much of an elitist type thing. But then, so when Baker Roshi left, you know, I mean, it was a big Zen center, and Reb was the only one who was the head guy, and he had a tremendous amount of pressure, and he was only 40 years old at the time, so he had a tremendous amount of pressure on him, and he, you know, it was really difficult, but somehow, you know, and Zen Center's still going strong. They have 3 major resident, you know, facilities.
Is he still alive?
Red? Yeah, he's 80. He's 80 years old. He's still teaching. Yeah.
So I appreciate the imagery of the electricity, I'll call it universal intelligence, and all the light bulbs. So the inside of a light bulb is called the filament. So I was thinking if we as light bulbs are receptive to the electricity, it really creates a full filament.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there you go. Fulfillment. Filled with the fullness of our aliveness. Yeah.
Fulfillment.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's another phrase in Buddhism is called the self-fulfilled samadhi. Samadhi is like a sort of an exalted state of concentration. So the self-fulfilled samadhi, filled with the fullness of the self, or our life force.
And you're speaking of intimacy, and just in a wordsmith way, I've heard it kind of broken down. Into me, see.
Mm-hmm. Into me.
There's like intimacy. Into me, see.
I hadn't heard that, but that makes sense. Yeah, and then asking what is intimacy? Well, you know, how intimate is the light bulb with the electricity? Pretty intimate, right? Yeah.
In meditation, we can feel that electricity coursing through our bodies if we're concentrated,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also, you know, that's blissful, and the teaching also is to give away, part of generosity is to give away the bliss. Say bye-bye bliss. And in giving away the bliss, we also have the opportunity to give away the sense of being a separate body-mind, and to give away the suffering.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm. Emily.
I had an experience years ago. I volunteered at Southern Dharma, and I did clean toilets.
Good for you.
Part of my job.
Did you clean the bathroom?
Oh yeah, cleaned everything. And the pull to go there, one, I'd never been to silent retreat, and two, I just read this book by a Buddhist teacher, and it was just a wonderful book. I just fell in love with it. And I saw that he was gonna be there while I was gonna be there, and I thought, cool, because, you know, once our chores were done, we could join the retreats. So I go, and first of all, it's at 4,000 feet, and I was a flatlander at the time. I wasn't used to being, you know, I was more sea level. And so, and I think I was maybe early 50s. Anyway, it was so hot. And there was no escaping the heat there. There was no wind, there was no pond, there was nothing like that. And we were working really hard to get the place ready for everybody. And they came, and I had to share a room with another woman who decided she needed total darkness, which meant she shut the windows and pulled the curtains. And it was just stifling in there. And then I went to sit with this person who wrote the book, and he proceeds to put us in a sitting position that would intentionally cause us pain.
Mm.
And I thought, this doesn't feel right. And then when I was doing kitchen duty, he came in there and he was acting holier than thou, and we were all in silence, and he was talking in a normal voice. So it was like, what is going on? Nothing is what I expected, right? And it was just like each day was worse than the day before. And I remember it was like the 10th time I was taking the slop bucket down to the compost place. And everybody was up in the meditation hut. And I'm walking along and I'm just going, oh my God, I can't get out of here. I committed to be here. You know, it's just on and on and on and on. And all of a sudden this voice goes, shut up, just really loudly. And I turned around and looked to see who it was. And I realized it came out of me.
Mm.
It was not a thought. It just came out of my body. And I remember, because I was studying with Eckhart Tolle, and I remember him asking the question, who is speaking in your mind? And like I have arguments in my mind, there's other voices. And I know you're a psychologist, but you know, it's not that kind of voices.
Not that kind of voice.
How do you know?
Yeah, right, right.
I think you're crazy, But it's like you started with the statement, something about I, and so I keep thinking, I don't know who I am. And the only choice I have is which voice to listen to that feels right.
Mm.
But you know, what is that? I mean, I don't know.
What was that?
Do other people have this experience where, you know, like you're mulling over something and one voice is saying, well, let's do this, and the other one's going, well, I don't know about that. You know, it's just like a dialogue, and I'm just sitting there. I mean, this body's just sitting there, and it's all going on.
Oh, I mean, if it happened all the time, that would be,
No, it doesn't happen.
yeah. I had a brother who committed suicide who was schizophrenic, and I remember having conversations with him, and he would say, well, I hear voices, and I'm saying, is it thoughts, or do you actually hear an auditory, sound? It's a voice telling you something, and he goes, it's an actual sound. It's an auditory. He would hear a voice that nobody else would hear. That's what he told me. Now, he might have just been trying to scare me. I don't know. But like I said, he wouldn't take his meds, and then finally,
No,
30
it's nothing like
anyway.
that.
Okay.
It's, the big awakening, and the whole reason why I was there was I realized it was the thoughts that was causing the suffering.
Yeah.
Totally. So
Yeah.
that was the awakening that I got from that whole
Right.
experience.
Right.
That,
Yeah.
and since supposedly I'm the only thinker in my mind, I can control that, which led me to more meditation and that kind of thing. But it was kind of an awakening. But I still wonder, when we use the word I, what we're just talking about this body. You know, what is I? What is me?
Yeah, and in my Zumi Roshi, the teacher I mentioned before, he actually said to actually study the vows, the vows of those bodhisattva vows. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Those 4 vows that we just talked about. He said to study those vows deeply is to find out what the I is. What is this I we call ourselves? So, I mean, when we're like 5 years old, we call ourselves I, right? And then when we're 15, we're much different, but we still call ourselves. So there's an I, even now, no matter how old we are. I is our primary sense of identity. The I of identity. And what is that I? It's obviously something that's been with us every moment of our life. So it's basically the awareness of here now is I. So all knowing beings, self-aware beings call themselves I. So if Bruno, you know, if Bruno had abstract thought, he would call himself I. Maybe he does anyway, I don't know. Yeah, so what is that I? And the fact that we all have that same question, what is this? There's something here that's been with us, has been us our whole life. What better than we all share that experience? What better proof is there of our interbeing? You know? And so if you have an experience like you had, it doesn't mean you're crazy or anything. It was just an insight that the thoughts are causing the suffering. You know? It's what we believe. And if we can accept, the boundary of our freedom is the boundary of what we can accept. So if we learn, and that's Reb's teaching also, is that he aligns himself with those who want to reduce suffering. But the Bodhisattva path is learning how, sit in those rings of fire, to learn how to actually accept the suffering. And that means realizing that our awareness, our Buddha nature, is not attached to the physical body. That it is possible to do, it is possible to accept suffering. Not easy, at least not in our present state, but it is possible. Yeah.
I have a Zen friend, about 70 years old, pretty deep into the practice, and he stopped using personal pronouns. He stopped using it altogether, so he would have these gaps in his sentences. And actually, I've heard Chai do that as well, many times, that he would not refer to himself as I.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes he would say Tai, but
Like
he wouldn't
third person?
usually say I.
Hmm.
And my friend is just following through with that. He's taken it out of his language, obviously in order to help him realize who he is. Pretty radical.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was gonna say that, I've thought a lot about that, and inner critic, and psychology, interjecting on parents and everything that they said I should be, and what I should do, and whatever, and that just still is there, it keeps going
Right.
on, but I work at not doing that, sometimes stubbornly, just to rebel against it, I guess. That's something that I battled with for years, and to this day, who I am, where I am, what I am is so opposed to how they were and what they wanted for me in my life, and all the rules and conditions they put on me, and who I could talk to, everything about it was very repressive, and I don't know if people have that experiences. I hear my mother and my father,
Oh, yeah.
blah, 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 and
Yeah.
Yeah, going back to the voices and this, continuing on that subject, I think we had this talk this morning about how in our minds we have, inner conversations all the time. We talk to ourselves 100 times more than anybody else combined talks to us. And those voices can be your mother and father, can be your aunts and uncles, your brothers, your sisters, your co-workers, or whoever you listen to has imprinted something in your brain that you sometimes, in meditation, for Tebby, that's what Tebby thinks about, when he's in meditation, I unravel those things and say, what is true, what is true, what is true? Because I find the truth is everywhere, and it's available to us all the time if we're willing to seek it.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, we're just taking in information and it's just sitting there.
Yeah.
And when that voice in your head is like, this guy and that guy and this politician and this religious person, this and you and everybody else, it's all in there. And I think meditation helps us unravel that. And
Yeah.
so you can just be no mind.
Yeah. There's a really interesting thing that Reb said about thinking that I hadn't heard before, a few years ago until I read it in this book. he said that bodhisattvas are always thinking. Those who are really dedicated to the bodhisattva vow of saving all beings from suffering. He said they're always thinking about how to save beings. How do we communicate the Dharma? How do we have the conversation about the Dharma, about all these incomprehensible things, you know? He says, but they don't grasp the thoughts. We learn how not to grasp the thoughts, but we offer them as gifts. We offer them to the Buddha like we offer all of our other experiences, so that the thinking doesn't disturb their deep tranquility. But their thinking is informed by this, because as they're offering the thoughts, they're receiving the acceptance of Buddha, and they're receiving the spirit of great compassion of Buddha. And so their thinking is informed by that compassion and by that intimacy with our true nature. And so there's a clarity and a freedom in it that doesn't get distracted, because they're not grasping at the thoughts. In other words, they don't grasp when someone's telling them, oh, you're a fat slob or something. They don't grasp the thought. So that really helped me think it's okay to be thinking about stuff. And so in terms of unraveling, I'm thinking, yeah, you unravel it, but allow Buddha to unravel by not grasping. Buddha will help you unravel the thoughts, and the feelings will unravel too, you know, along with it. Yeah.
As we're talking about this, I'm thinking about the I as a channel for experience and awareness. And it's a channel that has continuity and memory. And mostly our typical experience of the I is narrow. It's like our own, but then it can expand. And it can be everything, and it comes back.
Yeah, I mean, it always is everything, but we try to limit it.
Awareness changes.
Our perceptions of awareness change. Yeah, but awareness itself is the boundless. But you know, when we stay still, practice being still, and just be with our being, then as we let go, I mean, as we allow Buddha to unravel our delusions about our thinking and our feeling and all that, then we begin to experience the freedom of those limitations. Those limitations are just delusions that we believe in but aren't really there, because they are just our true nature taking the form of thinking, feeling, hearing, or seeing.
So it's a channel that's in a sense it's a delusion that it's a channel.
Well, the delusion appears as a channel. It appears as a confinement, like we think we're this container of self, in the body, you know. There's an entity back in the head somewhere. But after a while, you just see that there's nothing there. It's like if you have a piece of paper, and there's a hole in the piece of paper, and you think the hole is in. Think of the paper as your physical body, and you see the hole, and you think that's the separate self. It's like the hole in the paper, and you think, oh yeah, there's a self inside the body. But when you look, like if you let our attention kind of fall or relax back to the source, it's like looking closer at the paper, and you see the hole, and you see the hole is not something. The hole is not there. The hole is just the space that the paper is actually in. So our physical body is in the space of awareness. We're not in the body. Or we are the awareness. We're not the body. It includes the body, but we're not confined in the physical body. And so then when we realize we're not confined in the physical body, it doesn't mean we're disembodied. It just means we're free of the confines of it. So we're freer to be fully in it, informed by the space of awareness, you know, and the freedom of awareness, like that. And that we're always that, you know, we are that freedom all the time. We are who we are all the time.
Wow.
Does that make
I
sense?
hope you recorded that piece.
Yeah, boy, I want that
Oh
recorded.
my goodness.
I want a
Did
transcript
you
of
get that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I've.
That was,
You remember what you said?
whoa.
Yeah, I remember what I said.
Put a comma, whoa, exclamation point.
Whoa.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, after a while, it just kind of comes out. I mean, it just kind of comes. I've only said it about 100 times.
Uh-huh.
Do a Dharma talk just on that.
Put that on your YouTube channel.
Yeah.
I would like to just button up my story. I just had a thought
Sure.
about it. Not long after, well, as soon as I screamed shut up, everything went away. The next 5 weeks were blissful. It was fun. It was just, I had like a breakthrough. And
Yeah.
so some weeks later, I used to live in DC, and the Dalai Lama would come every year, just almost every year. And so I was sitting with him, and I brought this up about being with pain, and that the teacher had asked us to be, and he did his little giggle, and he goes, "There's enough pain and suffering in the world. We do not need to add to it." And I was like, thank you, because it was just such an odd thing. Anyway, that's the end of that story.
That's in the Bible. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. Same
Mm.
thing.
Say that again?
Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof.
Yeah.
There's enough trouble. We don't need to create anymore.
Oh,
Yeah. And that's a big part of the generosity teaching too, is we don't try to force, we have to be generous with our bodies, take care of them. Don't try to force ourselves to accept pain that we're not ready, and sometimes there's pressure to open up energy blocks that aren't ready to open up, and you can really endanger your perceptual apparatus, strokes and brain damage and things like that can happen. Sometimes they call them Kundalini disorders. Kundalini is the energy moving up. Hakuin had one of those. He had a Kundalini disorder because he was like sitting too hard, like he'd have these delusions like he was flying in outer space, and he kind of blew some gaskets in his nervous system, so he had to go find a hermit who was a healer, off on the mountain somewhere. And he had to do these, these visualizations of pouring sweet honey down his body, mind, or subtle body, or whatever. And it took him a while to heal himself, but he did.
Speaking of the body, I wanted to share the experience I'm having, which is very physical. The difficulty in stillness and the anxiety and energy of restlessness and pain in sitting, or discomfort in sitting for such a long period of time. I'm not sure what the learning is in that. It is in relationship to what you just said, right? Am I forcing myself to try to sit to learn from the sitting, or do I acknowledge and honor that I can't sit, or I need to keep moving, or it's just an interesting experience. This is all very new to me, sitting like this long time.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to share that. I don't know that there's an answer, but
Well, be
it's
kind.
really curious.
Yeah, be kind to your pain.
This is why I'm standing.
Right. But it's not
Yeah.
just pain, it's like restless, it's like an incredible anxiety and restlessness.
Mhm.
That
Mhm.
like just,
It's okay.
It's okay. It's calling for
been there.
compassion. The anxiety is calling for compassion.
I've learned to accept my laziness.
Does it make you less lazy?
You might try standing and see if that would help.
I have to keep moving, like I said, I stand or
I'm
whatever.
kind of doing
Yeah.
like this.
I like this rocking, it just, I can't, yeah, just a restlessness, you know, anxiety.
There's stuff buried down there. It needs to, or it feels that way.
It's just, yeah.
I experienced that when I used to sit in Quaker meeting, when I was new to the Quaker meeting and everybody's pretty still in there. It was before I had a dedicated meditation practice. And my whole body felt like it wanted to scream and run out of there. You know, I mean, because it was so quiet, and the idea was just to wait for the Holy Spirit to come through you, you know, and that wasn't coming through me.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
painful. My body would just clench up in different muscles, and oh, goodness. I'm glad I learned to sit still.
Well, you know, I went to a Vipassana 10-day silent meditation retreat 15 years ago. And the first 2 days, I was ripping my hair out. I would go into my room and stick my head in the pillow and scream.
Mm.
But after the third day, I was motherfucking everybody. I wanted to kill everybody in the place. I mean, that girl over there, you bitch. But then the third day came around, I sat, and it was like 7 hours later, I was still sitting there. I said, this is pretty good. After 10 days, I hadn't spoke at all. And when they opened up on the last day for lunch, I reached over and touched somebody and said, that was amazing. And the guy said, don't touch me. I said, he missed the lesson.
What was he thinking all those days?
I don't know, but he was very adamant, don't touch me. But then, you know, it took me 10 days. Ever since then, I haven't had that anxiety and that rigidness, that just outward emotion.
Yeah.
It's just, I just accept everyone's where they are, and that's okay. And you'll get through it. And if you need to walk around the building a few times, fine. You want to get in your car and go for a ride, go for a ride.
Yeah.
Nobody's holding you here. Nobody's holding anybody here,
I think
right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see any handcuffs to it. Okay, just making sure.
I think it's also learning, like, that the meditation for me could be something reflected in a different kind of practice, not necessarily sitting, you know.
Yeah.
It could be running, you know, it's having an athlete. It's
To
part of
help it unravel could be
Yeah.
some of that.
just even listening to the rhythm of it or
Yeah,
something.
and also, I mean, you know, in saying that they're calling for compassion, the restless feelings, you know, you can use your contemplation as an opportunity to just be open to it and ask, what are you trying to tell me? What is the anxiety trying to, what message? And images from your childhood might come up or something, or some past bad relationship or bad job, you know, something like that. And then be accepting of that, kind of let it run the way it needs to be released. You know.
Jeff Warren is a meditation teacher who has a running meditation.
Mhm.
If you look him up, and he's got ADHD, and so he has the same issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he has a running, not that I do it, but he's got a running meditation that is like highly reviewed.
Thank you. So I
Yeah.
can just find him online, Jeff
Yeah,
Warren.
Jeff Warren, yeah.
I was gonna make a suggestion as well, because I tried for years to meditate and I couldn't sit there. And I was invited to walk a labyrinth. And the very first time I did it is when I really was able to let go. It was the movement, but it helped me. So the more I did that, then I was able to transition to sitting still too. But I had kind of the same thing. I didn't realize the walking that we did. I mean, that's a form of meditation.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. There's a labyrinth at the Light Center and at different churches.
There's one at, UMC Asheville.
Right.
I have a question for everybody, if we wanna eat at 6, we can.
Yeah.
Would you be interested in doing that?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll tell. Thank you.
It was gonna be 6:30, right?
It was gonna be 6:30, yeah.
Yes, if you'll have it ready, yeah. Well, we could take a little break.
The
And this- and-
question is this a break in noble silence? Or is it a break of everybody chatting?
You're supposed to be the disciplinarian.
I did
You're
bring
asking
my
me?
I would add one, is breathing. And when I get fidgety, I come back to my breath, my experience of it. And I would also like to offer to the group, when I was walking Jackson this morning, there was a gentleman going around the property with loppers, trimming, I think what he perceived was things in the way of our parking. And that's where all this, that's where the flowers came from. I did not take my loppers out and trim this property.
Just
He
recycling.
trimmed them and left them, and I salvaged them.
Yeah.
And it was important for me to share that, because I'm a gardener and I wouldn't want any projection that I had trimmed someone else's property. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have another thing to share with you. You did. I come from a tradition that integrates the practice of meditation with more of a psychological inquiry practice. And so often what comes up powerfully in meditation may be something that then you take and inquire with another person about. So that's a way of being compassionate with
Yeah.
and it's also a way of letting yourself know you more. When you're still, these things come forward, and they're often very important.
So, we are gonna eat at 6, and right now Maggie's going to lead us in some movement, but we need our mats, and my yoga mat was, somebody else had it.
Is that it?
And